Yo, what's good, y'all? It's your host HD Samurai here, and welcome to the channel. Today I'm here to bring y'all a new What If, this being the What If movie to What If Deku had the Rinnegan. Thank y'all so much for tuning into the What If. Hopefully you guys do enjoy. And right before we get into it, I do want to let you guys know on one thing, that being the fact that right after this What If, I'm going to go on a little bit of a break, as I don't want to burn myself out from making these What If. As much as I enjoy them, they do take up a large amount of energy. But do not worry, y'all, I will eventually end up coming back. It's going to be a really short break, do not worry. But still, nonetheless, it's your host HD Samurai here, and it's time for us to begin the What If. So with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
To begin the What If, we're not going to start out with Deku's origins. Now, Deku will be born just like he does in the main timeline, except the only difference here is the fact that Deku gets born with the Rinnegan. Now, at first, many people thought that Deku had a quirk because of the Rinnegan, so they decided to check on him, and to their surprise, he didn't manifest it. Now, this surprises everyone, but still, nonetheless, Inko is very happy to have her child, as after that, she continues to go on raising Deku. Now, we do a time skip to when Deku starts school, as after that, everyone in the classroom would try to befriend Deku, mostly because of the fact they thought his eyes looked cool, and they thought Deku had a quirk. But soon later on, Deku would then mention that he didn't have a quirk yet, which surprises everyone, as well as caused Deku's whole popularity to go down by a lot, although Deku didn't really care at all about it. Now, eventually moving forward through the months, Deku will eventually end up reaching the very top of the class, since no matter what book Deku ends up reading, he's able to read it all in a single glance, thanks to the Rinnegan's abilities. As Deku will be doing this quite frequently, allowing him to memorize everything, this is when finally Bakugo would awaken his quirk. Now, as soon as Bakugo got his quirk, just like Deku when he first entered it into the school, he would instantly gain a large amount of friends and popularity. As many people begin to gas up Bakugo, saying that he's going to have a very bright future, as many of the kids as well as teachers would then say that Bakugo is going to have a bright future becoming a pro hero. And this will cause Bakugo to change to being very arrogant. Now, during this time, Deku didn't really care much about Bakugo, as he mostly focused on his studies and continued being at the top of the class. And Bakugo, he will be very pissed off about this, so he decided to make Deku the target of bullying. As every single time he will always make fun of Deku, begin to gloss over him about the fact that he has a quirk and Deku doesn't, all the while Deku did not really care about him. In fact, Deku was too focused on his studies and helping to support his mother that he couldn't care less about what Bakugo was thinking about. Because you see, in this timeline, Deku was way more mature, so that means he doesn't really rise to Bakugo's taunts, and he doesn't really care about the fact that he couldn't become a hero without a quirk, since Deku knows that there's more jobs out there than just becoming a hero. He's not obsessed with the job. Now, Bakugo one day gets super annoyed by the fact that Deku does not react to him, and that the fact that Deku is at the top of the class. So this ends up enraging Bakugo enough to the point where he actually tries to attack Deku, which surprises everyone since Bakugo has never done that before. He always just criticizes Deku and that's it, but now he was actually blatantly attacking him. But to the surprise of everyone again, Deku will be able to dodge every last one of Bakugo's attacks. Bakugo continues trying to throw attack after attack, yet Deku continues dodging and dodging, as thanks to the Rinnegan, Deku was able to see the attacks before they were able to hit him. Now, this ends up causing Bakugo to get more and more angry, enough to the point where he ends up releasing a big explosion in the middle of the classroom, to which Deku ends up dodging it, luckily. Now, this ends up getting the attention of the teachers, and this actually ends up getting Bakugo in trouble, which Bakugo was very surprised about this since he never got in trouble for doing or using this quirk. Now, he ends up getting really angry at Deku, as he blames him for why he got in trouble. And Deku, after seeing the glare, just simply ignores Bakugo and goes back to his study, as this is where we then get a time skip. Throughout the time in school, Deku would actually begin to realize more and more abilities about the Rinnegan. As more time would go by, Deku would slowly begin to discover more and more abilities, such as one of them being able to alter his body, another one being able to summon out animals, another one being able to literally control repulsive and attractive force, and another one of the abilities allows him to bring out invisible clones, this being Limbo. Which I forgot to mention this, but Deku will have all the unique abilities of the Rinnegan. Just gonna let you know right now. But the thing is, as Deku begins to slowly discover these abilities, he also begins to realize the toll of every single one of them. And mostly because of the fact that every single time Deku would use these abilities, he would realize that over time he gets more and more exhausted. He gets less and less energy and he gets tired. This caused Deku to realize that he needs to train to use these abilities, as well as the fact that he needs to learn how to use these abilities wisely. Now, eventually Deku ends up telling his mother about these abilities, and she's very proud of her child, but when she once again takes him to the doctor to see if he has a quirk, once again, they end up saying that Deku doesn't have it. She's very confused at this, but still nonetheless she's still proud of Deku and tells him to continue on with his training, and honestly really glad that her child grew up to be very mature. Now over time in school, Deku begins to slowly leave his classmates behind, as the thing is Deku is way too mature and smart that he literally cannot stay in the same level as everyone else. And Bakugo, after seeing the fact that Deku was going to be skipping a couple of grades higher than him, he'll be furious, as every single time he would try to pick on Deku, Deku would some way somehow be able to one-up him, as whenever Bakugo tries to fight Deku, Deku would just simply dodge. Whenever Bakugo tries to make taunts at Deku, Deku would simply ignore it. And whenever Bakugo tries to pull pranks on Deku, Deku will always know what's going to happen. It just pissed off Bakugo so much, and even worse is the fact that Deku was literally at the top of the class, even beating Bakugo, who was literally second place, and Bakugo couldn't stand it. As over time Deku continues excelling in classes, he would eventually end up skipping a couple of grades, as he actually ends up finishing up high school at the solemn age of only 11, as he ends up leaving everyone in his class behind and even passing high school. Now after finishing high school, Deku actually decides to try out for the UA entrance exams, but unfortunately in this timeline, they hadn't passed on the new rule that even quirkless students can take the exams. So due to this, Deku is not able to join the exams and he's not even able to take it. Now Deku feels very upset about this, but still nonetheless is able to move on. As for the meantime, Deku decides to work at a local bakery, as he works for a minimum wage but is still happy with that, as he had plans to do bigger jobs later on, jobs that can make him way more money. It's just that none of them involve doing hero work, or at least that's what Deku thought at first. Until the day Deku ends up meeting a very certain man. As on the day that Deku was just simply closing up the bakery as he finally finished his daily shift, as currently right now he was going to go home. But as he was walking home though, this is when he ends up seeing something surprising. It will be one of the local heroes that were there, and Deku had actually met him a couple of times. Now Deku didn't really think much about the guy, as he seemed to be kind of average, nothing really special, but currently right now he was seeing an entirely different person, as this guy was trying to use his status as a hero to get with this girl, but unfortunately the girl has no signs of trying to get with him. And this pisses off the hero to the point where he actually tries to use force, and Deku seeing this cannot let it slide. Even though he wasn't a hero, he was not going to let someone get hurt right in front of him. As just when the man was about to hit the girl, Deku will end up switching places with her, using the powers of the Rinnegan. Now this caused the man to actually miss his target completely, as he looks at Deku totally confused before getting angry. He tries to attack Deku, but Deku ends up dodging out the way, and in a very split moment he decides to hit him in the stomach. The hero winces in pain before finally he turns to Deku once again, and this time he smirks cruelly, as he says that Deku apparently has assaulted a hero, and that means he's under the ground of being arrested and charged for the crime. And Deku hearing this couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe the audacity of this man. As the man now tries to activate his quirk against Deku, this is when Deku then decides he had enough, as he decides to activate the Rinnegan. Any attack that the man threw at Deku would then be blown away thanks to the Rinnegan's ability, although Deku tells the girl to leave. And the lady would listen to Deku, not wanting to argue with him, as after making sure that the lady was okay, Deku would then turn his attention back to the pro hero, as the man was still trying to attack Deku with his quirk. Not that it mattered much, considering the fact that Deku had a power way greater than his. As when the man finally looks into Deku's eyes again, he feels true fear, as Deku was completely cold and uncaring, as this is when Deku would then use the abilities of the Rinnegan to transform his right arm into a cannon. And the man would see the cannon, he would instantly freeze up as he tries to run away, but unfortunately it was too late, as Deku would then let loose the cannon, causing the man to literally get hit with an explosion and causing him to be sent flying and crashing into a wall. As the man's body will be burnt and badly injured, Deku will look at the man coldly, as Deku's arm would then return back to normal. But just as Deku plans to leave the area, this is when he then stops, as suddenly someone would then appear right behind Deku. Deku turns around and faces the person, only to be surprised as this will be Stain, as he will be early in his hero killer career. Stain will look at Deku, then look at the hero that fell to the ground, before he then smirks and turns his attention back to Deku, before telling him that he did an impressive job. Now Deku, after hearing this, will be very confused, as he decides to leave the area, but to his surprise, Stain decides to follow Deku. Now this will go on for a couple of minutes before Deku finally had enough, and turns his Rinnegan eyes to Stain, as he begins to ask him what he wants. And Stain, after hearing this, then stops as he begins to ask Deku a bunch of questions. Now these questions will be related to the hero that Deku just took down, as well as Deku's philosophy. And once Deku ends up answering all these questions, Stain smiles even more, as he begins to ask Deku if he wants to make a change in the hero society. And Deku, after hearing this, will raise his eyebrow, as this is when Stain begins to pitch his idea to Deku. Now at first, Deku does not listen to Stain at all and declines immediately. But soon after those following days, Deku would actually realize just how corrupt the Hero Society was. As more reports began to follow in every single day, with different incidents happening involving different heroes. And Deku begins to realize just how much a lot of these heroes get away with, as many heroes would cause large amount of collateral damage and many other things, and they'll be able to walk away with it if they just simply apologize, and that's it. As most of the time they barely show any sign of compensation, unless it's a very large populated area. But if it's something small and non-important, they don't give a damn about it. And while Deku understood that there are still some nice heroes out there and that are really working for truth and justice, there's many that aren't. Many that are truly bad people. They're just using the hero title as a way to get away with it. Now, after a while debating this, sooner or later, on the dead of night, this is when Deku would then actually confront Stain once again, as this time Stain had just caught another body from another corrupt hero. As he looks at Deku wondering his answer, this is when Deku would actually say that he wants in. And Stain, after hearing this, can do nothing more but smile, as this is where we then do a time skip. For the next following years that went by, Stain and Deku would actually hunt down corrupt heroes, taking them down and bringing true justice around. And whenever there actually was a villain attack, Deku would actually interfere. Although Stain has told Deku multiple times to stay out of their way, Deku did not listen to him at all, as long as he has the power to help out, he would. And this made Stain have a huge respect for Deku, while at the same time he thinks that Deku should have been a hero. But unfortunately he couldn't because of the fact that he was quirkless, although Stain did not believe that at all. As during those following years that went by, Deku would actually be taught by Stain, as he would learn skills such as fighting, using different types of weapons, and also what to expect when hunting down corrupt heroes. As with all those teachings, Deku was able to make himself a true threat, as he was able to hunt down pro heroes that were corrupted with ease, with all of them not being able to land a single hit on him. And what made it even better was the simple fact that Deku did all this while still being able to live his life, as he was able to go back to his local bakery to continue working, and he was able to go back to his mother without any problems. As we now turn back to the present, Deku and Stain had just finished up once again taking care of a few corrupt heroes, and now currently right now Deku is going to return back home. As Deku decides to jump from rooftop to rooftop to get home, he then stops as he ends up overhearing a plan. As currently in an alleyway, a group of villains were discussing about the plan that was about to commence, as apparently that group of villains along with many other group of villains were planning to attack the UA students. Now Deku couldn't believe it as he was listening to all this, as just like that the group of villains would then leave while Deku would stand on the rooftop wondering what he should do. As we now turn to the day of the USJ incident. Now the USJ incident would kick off the exact same way as it does, as the only difference here is the fact that Deku isn't there. As the villains would arrive at the scene and begin to attack all the students, this is when the Nomu would then arrive as well, as it begins to fight off against Aizawa. And just like in the main timeline, Aizawa could not beat the Nomu, as he was getting beaten down and completely overwhelmed. And just when it seemed like the Nomu was about to attack Aizawa once again and give him another devastating blow, this is when suddenly it would then be sent flying by an unknown pressure. Now Shigaraki will be very surprised at this, but he'll be even more surprised as he sees that one by one, different arrays of his grunt workers were getting stopped as they seemed to be paralyzed. As this is when suddenly one by one, every single one of them begins to fall down to the ground bleeding. As Shigaraki will be very confused. But this is when suddenly appearing out of thin air would be none other than both Stain and Deku. As Deku will be currently wearing a mask that were to cover up like a majority of his face, but the only thing that was being revealed would be the Rinnegan. Not only that, but he will be wearing a black hoodie to cover his hair too. Now Stain will be there as he'll be cursing out at Deku for having him involved in all this, as he ends up cleaning up his blade that was full of blood. Deku will be doing the same thing as he thanks Stain for the help, to which Stain just grunts, telling him that he still has a few more villains to take care of, while also telling Deku to be careful around the Nomu. Now Deku says that he will, as after that he then faces off against the Nomu, all the while Aizawa and Shigaraki are trying to find out who these guys were. Now Shigaraki begins to scratch himself profusely as he begins to try to rush at Deku and attack him, but as he does, this is when suddenly Deku's finger will then turn into a gun as he ends up shooting Shigaraki in the foot, causing Shigaraki to fall to the ground in pain. As Deku tells Shigaraki to remain right there, Deku would turn his attention back to the Nomu as the Nomu would then get up from the crater as he then rushes at Deku. Now Deku, seeing the Nomu approaching, would then suddenly pull out his katanas, as after that he then rushes over to fight it. As this is where we then get a fight between the Nomu and Deku. And Deku is already showing to have way more skill and technique, but not having enough strength. As while he's able to cut through the Nomu here and there, unfortunately the Nomu is able to regenerate itself and not only that, but is able to absorb a large amount of Deku's strikes. So due to this, Deku was having a pretty difficult time, or at least that's what Shigaraki thought, until Deku decides to bust out the Rinnegan. As thanks to the Rinnegan, he was able to predict all of the Nomu's attacks and was able to dodge them all without getting injured. As this fight would go on for quite a while, all the while Stain is taking care of a large majority of the villains. This is when Stain will be tired of all this as he screams at Deku to finish it. And Deku, after hearing this, understood, as this is when he then dodges out of the way of another attack from the Nomu, and to the surprise of everyone that wasn't Stain, both of Deku's arms then turn into laser cannons, as he would then hop directly onto the Nomu's neck and point both of the cannons directly to its brains. As the Nomu would then let out a ginormous cry of pain, as its brain will be completely obliterated, turning it into a very gruesome sight to everyone that was watching. As the Nomu's body then falls to the ground, Shigaraki cannot believe that the Nomu that was created to face off against All Might was beaten so easily by what seems to be a kid. And Shigaraki was not the only one, as even Aizawa couldn't believe it, as he was having such a hard time against the thing only for Deku to beat it. As he wondered who exactly these two were, this is when suddenly Deku would then call out to Stain, which causes Stain to react instantly as he disappears and appears right beside Deku. As after that, Deku ends up tapping Stain on the shoulder, and just like that, the both of them will end up teleporting out the way. And the reason for this one was because of the fact that just at the moment they teleported, All Might would arrive at the scene, as Deku already knew that they needed to get out of there quickly as possible, as he could literally sense All Might approaching. Now this will surprise Shigaraki, as he can do nothing more but curse out the two of them just as All Might begins to put in the work. Now after this, Shigaraki is luckily able to escape barely with his life, but still he's very pissed off about what had occurred. He begins to ask his men for information on the two of them that interrupted their plan, while at the same time he starts reporting about everything that happened to All For One. And All For One is very interested. After all, the ability to just simply turn your arm into cannon and the fact that he was so fast to be a Nomu that was designed to be All Might was very impressive. So he decides to ask Shigaraki questions about everything that had occurred, to which Shigaraki was gladly to do so. Now soon, after those events had finally passed, we see Deku as well as Stain. As for the next following months that went by, they went back to their regular schedules, that means hunting down corrupt heroes. And they would do this for a couple of months, until suddenly, during the time of the UH Sports Festival, since Deku isn't there participating, he actually ends up stumbling upon something else, as Deku ends up finding out about Shiosaki. You see, during the time of the UH Sports Festival, Deku ends up stumbling upon Eri, as she was trying to make another getaway, but this time Deku was able to find her before someone was able to bring her back. Now, as the man that was trying to bring Eri back would try to attack Deku in order to make sure that he gets Eri back, Deku ends up defeating the man in an instant, as after that he ends up talking with Eri as she begins to cry and explain everything that had occurred. And Deku, after hearing about her story, he felt pure unbridled anger. Later on, after making sure that Eri was alright and that she was okay, Deku decides to bring her back to his mother so that way she can actually look after her while he takes care of certain business. Now at first, Inko was very confused about where Deku had found Eri, but after a little bit of a discussion going back and forth, Inko decides to take care of Eri for a little bit until they're able to find her a home, to which Deku is completely okay with it. Although Eri needed some convincing to stay with Inko, luckily she trusts Deku for now, so she decides to trust Inko for now. As after making sure that Eri was safe, Deku decides to tell Stain about everything that had occurred, and although Stain will be very upset, he begins to tell Deku that he's beginning to get in over his head. As Stain, by this point, he's able to understand that Deku is like a vigilante, but the problem with that is the fact that, thanks to Deku being a vigilante, that means he's more in danger. Because if villains were to ever discover Deku's identity, they could eventually end up finding out where he lives and can eventually end up threatening the people that he cares about. Except the only difference between Deku and heroes is the fact that heroes actually have backup. Deku only has himself and Stain, and that's it. And after explaining this to Deku, Deku still nonetheless wants to go through with the plan, as he wants to take down Shiosaki and make him pay for what he did to Eri. In Stain, after hearing this, he will feel very upset, but still nonetheless decides to help Deku. As after that, this is where he then changed scenes. Now by this point, Overhaul had been informed that Eri had escaped, and not only that, but apparently one of his grunts had failed to bring her back. And this pissed off Overhaul, as the grunt that eventually was returned back to, well, Overhaul, he was killed off in an instant, because he was so pissed off. Now eventually he begins to actually order his men to look for her, as well as trying to find out and pinpoint her location, but as he does though, this is when suddenly one of his servants would then run in, as they begin to explain that they were under attack, which surprises, well, Overhaul, considering the fact that the base should be well hidden. As he begins to ask who was currently attacking them, and the man would then say that there was only 2 people, surprising him even more. As currently right now, running through all the enemies and destroying and killing them off will be none other than Stain and Deku, as Stain decides to stay behind and take care of any villains that may arrive, as he tells Deku to go on ahead to get his revenge, to which Deku will end up telling him that he's thankful. Now after this, Deku will end up encountering some servants of, well, Overhaul, but he's able to bring them down with an instant, bringing out his katana and able to slice right through them as well as teleporting. As Deku would do this for a while, even bringing out his Limbo clones, until eventually he ends up arriving at Overhaul's room. Now Overhaul would be there as he would be trying to look as calm as possible, but Deku can already tell that this man was very pissed off. As Overhaul tries to act all friendly to Deku, trying to act nice and calm and approaching, this is when he would then try to slap Deku directly in the face, trying to activate his quirk. Yet Deku is able to dodge out the way, as he ends up bringing out his katana and tries to stab directly into Overhaul's stomach. Luckily, Overhaul is somehow able to dodge. As after that, we then get a fight between Overhaul and Deku, as Overhaul destroys his entire office and practically his entire base, just trying to hit Deku, all the while Deku ends up dodging out the way of every last one of his attacks thanks to Rinnegan. And this will continue on for a while, as thanks to the teleporting ability of the Rinnegan, Deku continues appearing and disappearing right in front of Overhaul, landing slashes here and there and giving him a large amount of damage. But the thing is, Overhaul is able to heal himself as he destroys the area that was harmed and will then put them back together thanks to his quirk. Now this will go on for quite a while until Deku would eventually end up realizing that he was getting tired, and I mean extremely tired. As you see, the thing is, Deku did not realize this, but he actually had chakra, and he had large amounts of it, which is why he was able to use the abilities of the Rinnegan so easily. But there was a problem, and it was the simple fact that all the moves that Deku was using throughout this fight had taken a large chunk of chakra, which caused Deku to get more and more tired each time. As the fight between Overhaul and Deku would continue on, eventually it will reach the finale, as Deku was able to dodge all of Shiisaki's attack and was eventually able to appear right in front of him, and was able to stab both his katanas directly into Shiisaki's chest. As Shiisaki falls onto the ground bleeding profusely, he tries to ask Deku for help, but unfortunately Deku did not care at all. He was ready to finish it. As this is when Deku then proceeds to use one of the busted abilities of the Rinnegan, as he puts a hand on Shiisaki's head. And just like that, Shiisaki would then feel himself die instantly, as his soul was ripped out of his body, as this will put an end to Overhaul. But you see, when Deku ended up yanking out the soul of Shiisaki, not only did he get all the memories of everything that Shiisaki had done given to him, but he also felt like he was just there, as he was forced to watch everything that Shiisaki had done, and this made Deku extremely sick, as he felt more glad than ever to kill him off. But now Deku already knew that now that Shiisaki is gone, he's gonna get a large amount of attention. As this is when Stain would then arrive, looking at the aftermath of the fight, as this is when Stain then tells Deku that he's gonna start getting attention from people that he doesn't want, to which Deku ends up telling him that he's ready for it. As after this is where we then have another time skip. Eventually all the events that had occurred with the Shiisaki incident would get revealed, as many people will be surprised that this happened during the UA Sports Festival. Now during this point, UA as well as many investigators are trying to find out exactly what happened, as Nezu as well as Aizawa were guessing that was probably the person who saved them from the USJ, as they're trying to find out who exactly that person may be. All the while Deku, he was having a pretty rough time, as the repercussions for his actions were already beginning to reveal themselves. As throughout the time in the middle of the night, whenever Deku was finally done taking care of corrupt heroes, he would actually be approached by villains this time, as most of the time Deku was the one to find villains, not the other way around. As villains begin to outright try to hunt down Deku, and Deku already realized this considering the fact that Shiisaki was actually funding a large amount of these villains, as many villains actually worked for him and Shiisaki was actually funding them. And due to this, Deku ends up getting a ginormous target on his back, as many villains would try to hunt him down. As it got so bad to the point where Deku literally had to use an illusion to change the way his eyes looked so that way no one guessed that it was him. So now whenever Deku was literally out in public or anything like that, his eye colors changed from being the Rinnegan to being the regular ones that he had in the main timeline. Now Inko would see Deku's changes and actually ask him why he was doing it, to which Deku had stated that he just felt self-conscious about it. Now while Inko would very much displeased about the idea of Deku changing his appearance, since in her eyes her son is perfect the way he is, but still nonetheless she has to go with it. Another thing that actually ends up happening is the fact that Iida decides to live with Deku's family, since she has gotten so used to them and does not want to be separated from them, and Inko was actually very happy to go along with the idea. Deku was also very happy, but the thing is that put more pressure on him, since now he has to keep 2 family members safe, and he was willing to do anything he could to make sure that happened. As we now do a time skip. Now throughout the following months that went by, Deku will be overtaxing himself, as he literally had to take care of corrupt heroes, and not only that but fight off against villains. Now luckily this allows Deku to get stronger and stronger, but even then it gets very annoying. Now Stain tries his best to help out Deku here and there, but he himself has his own agenda. Since although him and Deku are working for a common goal, that being to change the hero society, both of them are doing it in a different way, as Deku is playing more like a vigilante and Stain is acting more like a villain, or at least in the public eyes. As this is where we then transition to the hero killer arc. Now the hero killer arc starts off the very same way, as Iida finds out that his brother's in the hospital after he had an encounter with Stain, and this pisses off Iida so much as he decides to hunt him down. So during the time of the internship, Iida eventually ends up finding out where Stain is and decides to hunt him down just like in the main timeline, and just like that, Iida fights off against Stain. But you see, while Deku in this timeline has gotten way stronger, so did Stain, as he was amped up due to the fact of training with Deku. So due to this, he was able to beat Iida way easier. Now Iida ends up getting more and more upset as he ends up cursing at Stain over and over again, all the while Stain debates on whether or not he should finish him off. Now on one hand, he was acting completely unlike a hero, as he was really doing it for revenge, or at least that's what Stain thought, but at the same time, he was making some very valid points. Not only that, but it seems as if Deku in this timeline was having an influence over Stain. So instead of actually trying to outright like kill off Iida or like finish him off, Stain just spits on him and just walks away, telling Iida that he's not even worth his time, as he decides to leave the area. Another thing that actually ends up happening is the fact that Stain did have a discussion with Shigaraki. The only thing was that Deku was not included, as during this time Shigaraki would be asking Stain to join him, although deep down he had a ginormous hatred for Stain, as he still does remember him from the USJ incident. Now Stain declines, and this of course leads to an altercation, yet All For One ends up telling Stain that he's free to go, surprising Shigaraki. As when Shigaraki later on asks All For One why he let him go, All For One just simply states that he's gonna need Stain for his plans later on, as All For One was actually brewing up something way more sinister. As this will be the end to the hero killer arc, as the only difference in this arc is the fact that Deku is not involved at all, as after all Deku had his own problems. And the only other thing that changed would be Stain not killing Iida, or not wanting to kill Iida I mean. As after this, we can now continue on with the story. So Deku by this point was having a really rough time, as he had to stop corrupt heroes that were currently still being active, and not only that, but he also had to stop a bunch of villains that were going after him. But still nonetheless, Deku will continue on, and this will actually end up leading to a very big argument between both Deku and also Stain. Cause you see, by this point, Stain has been Deku's one and only friend throughout all of this, as he's been there from the very beginning all the way till now. And I mean, Stain even taught Deku. But the problem with Deku is the fact that he continues playing the role of hero even though he isn't a hero, and he can't continue on with this path. Cause like Stain has said before, Deku legit has no backup other than him, and while the two of them are strong, they can't do this all by themselves. And the thing is, both Deku and Stain are completely different. Although they're similar, they're still different. As Stain, he's literally hunting down heroes, and due to that many people see him as a villain. Although while Deku is more of a vigilante than anything else, as he goes after both heroes and villains, and the only heroes he goes after are the bad ones. Now while Stain can understand and respect that, the big problem is the fact that Deku is putting himself and also everyone that he cares about in danger. Cause the thing is, the difference between both Deku and Stain in this one is the fact that Stain has no one. So that means that the only one to suffer for his actions would be only him. While Deku, he has 2 people to care about and 2 people to worry about. This being Inko and Eri. So that means the more danger that Deku is putting himself in, the more at risk they are. And sure, although Deku is doing a good job of keeping his identity hidden, how long can that last? And this would lead to an argument between both Stain and Deku multiple times, with Deku still wanting to continue what he's doing and Stain trying to talk him out of it. As we now turn back to present time, we see Deku currently jumping from rooftop to rooftop, as he eventually ends up landing down to the ground, now currently walking back home. Cause you see, right now Deku was thinking over on everything that Stain was talking about, as he truly wonders if he should continue doing this business. The business of just simply taking care of corrupt heroes, considering the fact that Deku realized just how at risk he is. Cause the thing is, if he kept going on like this for too long, his family can potentially be in danger. And although Stain has been there to help out Deku whenever he's in trouble, or just to help him out take down organizations and everything else, the thing is the fact that Stain has his own agenda. He has his own things that he needs to do. All the while, Deku was playing the role of a hero way too much. So as Deku continues to contemplate this is when suddenly he stops, as this is when suddenly Deku would then see himself surrounded, as once again a bunch of villains that work for Shiosaki had appeared. Every last one of them would look at Deku with a cruel and smug smirk, all the while Deku would sigh as he once again has more work to do. As this is where we then do a time skip once again. So by this point now, Deku has already defeated all the villains and is currently still going through the process of every single day, just simply slaying more and more villains and stopping corrupt heroes. So eventually, during the time of slaughtering a bunch of villains, Deku ends up overhearing something, as apparently the League of Villains were planning to make their move again. Now Deku, after hearing this information, tries to find out more about it, but unfortunately, the information seems to be scarce, as only the main members of the League of Villains know exactly what's about to go down. This ends up causing Deku to curse, as he decides to inform this to Stain, as he tries to ask Stain for help in this situation. But you see, by this point, Stain is already done. He had tried telling Deku multiple times to quit this cause this life isn't for him. Although Deku has gifted abilities and multiple other things, heck even Stain can say that he sees a lot of potential in Deku. That potential belongs to being a hero, not for this type of job. So due to this, Stain has decided not to help Deku on this one, as he tells Deku that he needs to really see what exactly he's getting into. Now Deku, after hearing this, feels very upset, but still nonetheless goes, as he decides to look for the information by himself, without Stain's help. So eventually Deku is able to find out as much information as he can, as apparently the rest of Class 1A were going to go to a forest training camp. So due to that, Deku decides to follow along. Now thanks to his enhanced training, Deku is able to sneak into the forest training camp, and once he ends up arriving there, he mostly camps out for a couple of days. Now he does end up informing his mother and everything, stating that he's going to go on a little bit of a trip, and although Inko was worried at first, Deku reassures her that he's going to be fine. So as we now turn our attention back to Deku, as he was waiting for the villains to appear, as currently right now he was currently just making himself a meal, this is when he then stops. As this is when blue flames would then erupt around the entire forest, surprising Deku. As this is when Deku would then hear the screaming of the students, which surprises him, as this is when he actually ends up picking up on a very peculiar scream. A scream that's way too young for it to be a student, as Deku ends up looking at the very top of the mountain. Now currently right now, at the very top of the mountain would be none other than Koda, as he was currently trying to run away for his life from Muscular. Muscular had just arrived on the scene, and since Koda was the very first one that he spotted, he decided to attack him. Now Koda will be trying his best to survive, but unfortunately it seems as if Muscular was not going to let him go. As just when it seemed like he was actually about to die, he closes his eyes waiting for anticipation, but this is when he actually feels himself be swapped places, as now he was no longer right in front of Muscular and instead was actually looking to the side, as suddenly replacing Koda would be none other than Deku. Deku had used the ability of the Rinnegan to switch places between him and Koda, allowing him to take Koda's place, as he ends up blocking Muscular's attack. Now Muscular will be very caught off guard, but he'll be even more caught off guard as Deku ends up stabbing him in the leg with a dagger, causing him to jump away. He ends up cursing at Deku as he ends up using his quirk to put more muscle on the wound, causing it to close up, which made Deku look at him with disgust. As this is when Muscular finally takes in the appearance of Deku, as he finally knows who he was. Now you see, by this point Deku has gained a large amount of popularity among villains, as while technically he wasn't a hero, he wasn't a villain either. So due to this, Deku actually ends up getting a pretty high bounty on his head, mostly from those that work for Shiosaki, and this ends up causing many villains to actually know who he was. Heck, even Shigaraki knew who Deku was, as he actually swore that he's going to kill him the next time he sees him. So due to now finding out who Deku was, Muscular would then get excited, as he begins to activate his quirk to the maximum potential, as well as putting on that weird headgear. Now Deku will look at Muscular as he sighs, as this is when he then pulls out a katana and a dagger as he prepares for combat, as this is where we then see the fight between Muscular and Deku. Now the fight would go on for quite a while since Deku was having a pretty hard time. The only reason why he was having a hard time is because of the fact that Muscular doesn't stay still enough to the point where he can't activate the, taking away his soul. And another thing is because of the fact that Muscular, well, every time that Deku would stab him, he would always put more muscle on top of the wound to close it shut. So due to this, Deku was not able to land a pretty decent blow with his blades, enough to the point where it could be fatal. So eventually, after going back and forth, Deku decides to finish it off, as he actually turns his hands into cannons and actually ends up blowing up Muscular, completely destroying everything about him. Now this ends up destroying the mountain as well, surprising Koda, as he couldn't believe how much firepower Deku had. Although Deku was actually reeling back from the recoil of the cannons, but also because of the fact that he used up a large amount of chakra to activate it. But still, nonetheless, he was able to save Koda, and after that, Deku decides to take him to safety. Now Deku would eventually end up arriving to Aizawa, as Aizawa was finished taking care of a clone of Dabi, and when he sees Deku, he instantly gets on guard, and he gets even more on guard when he sees Deku with Koda. Now Aizawa tries to threaten Deku as well as trying to intimidate him by activating his quirk, but unfortunately that doesn't work against Deku. As this is when Deku then gives Koda to Aizawa, acting as if nothing happened, to which Aizawa begins to finally ask Deku if he was truly an enemy or if he was an ally, to which Deku then says that he was neither. As after this was taken care of, Deku would then run through the forest as he begins to hunt down the other villains. Deku also calls upon his Limbo clones, allowing them to appear as he tells them to hunt down the other villains, to which they do so. As one by one, each one of the League of Villains will end up getting captured by a Limbo clone. All the while, Deku continues looking for the main ones. As just as Deku was running around through the forest, he ends up seeing this ginormous iceberg that was currently right now trying to capture Mr. Compass, who was jumping through the air. Now Mr. Compass, after seeing Deku, will be very surprised, as he tries to call out to the others to inform them, but unfortunately it was too late. As this is when Deku actually ends up switching places with a rock and Mr. Compass, allowing Mr. Compass to appear right in front of him. Now Mr. Compass will be very surprised as he tries to escape from Deku, but unfortunately it was way too late, as Deku decides to kill him off using the soul ability of the Rinnegan, killing him off instantly as well as gathering intel. Now this will also end up freeing up both Tokoyami and Bakugo, as Bakugo, when he wakes up, he immediately sees Deku and he thinks that Deku is a villain, so he tries to attack him, only for Deku to look at him and send him flying with the Shinra Tensei. Now this ends up sending Bakugo flying, as he then gets up and tries to attack Deku again, but unfortunately Deku was having none of it, as he ends up using the ability to alter his body, as he ends up creating a kind of gas, as this will be tear gas to make Bakugo pass out. As after this, Deku would then decide to hunt down the rest of the villains, now knowing where the location is. Now we see Dabi and Twice currently waiting for Mr. Compass to arrive, as they saw the ginormous iceberg, but unfortunately they didn't see him. So as they were currently wondering where he was right now, this is when suddenly walking through the shadows will be none other than Deku. As Deku had arrived here, he begins to state to them that he's going to take them down, to which the both of them will then look at each other, then look back at Deku, and they will begin to laugh, as Twice begins to make fun of Deku for trying to challenge them all by himself, all while Deku looks at them with a cold expression. As this is where we then see a fight between Dabi and Twice, and also Deku. As Deku would fight off against both Dabi and Twice, he'll be having a pretty hard time at first since both of them were just currently jumping him, but over time it will be a reversal, as Deku will be the one jumping them instead. As he'll bring out the Limbo clones will beat down on both Dabi and Twice, as they'll be confused considering the fact that the Limbo clones are invisible to them, they can't see them. So this ends up resulting in both Dabi and Twice getting beaten up, and before they try to even escape, this is when Deku actually ends up summoning out the black chakra receivers, or the black rods that, Pain ends up summoning out and spamming. As he ends up using these to stab into both Dabi's and Twice's arms, preventing them from moving. As this will end up causing them to curse out and scream out in pain, this is when Deku begins to ask them about who exactly they're working for. And if they don't, well, Deku has different ways of gathering information. So this ends up leading to an interrogation between the two of them, as unfortunately both Dabi and Twice can already realize that Deku is not afraid to kill them, as they can already tell that this kid was not a hero, no. And he's not exactly a villain either, but he damn well looks like one. As after talking with the two of them and after finally getting the information, Deku will be very upset, but before he can do anything else, this is when suddenly sludges begin to appear, as this is when Nomus appear all around the entire forest, one appearing right in front of Deku. Now at first Deku will be caught off guard, but he will soon kill off the Nomu, and this will end up alerting the others as they all begin to swarm Deku. Now as Deku is getting swarmed by the Nomus, this is when suddenly Dabi and Twice will then all be warped away thanks to Kodagiri, and not only that, but so will the other villains. As this ends up causing Deku to be very pissed off, as after taking care of all the Nomus, he decides to leave the area, as he could hear the police sirens nearing by. As we now change scenes. In a different location, we currently see Stain as he was currently slaughtering down a bunch of corrupt heroes, and right now he was feeling pretty guilty about leaving Deku, to take care of the entire situation by himself. But he knew that Deku needed to learn a lesson. It was the simple fact that He can't keep doing this. Now as Stain begins to think over on everything though, this is when he then stops, as he will suddenly hear slow clapping. As suddenly footsteps will then be heard in the alleyway as he turns around, as suddenly walking through the darkness and slowly clapping his hands will be none other than All For One. Now by this point Stain does not know who this man is, as currently right now All For One was not in his formal attire, and number 2 was because of the fact that he hadn't fully revealed himself. So as the only thing that Stain is able to see is a suit, so he's not able to tell that it's All For One. Now once Stain ends up seeing All For One, he tries to attack him, but the thing is, All For One, even though he was still weakened, he could still take on Stain at the very moment. As just as Stain was actually about to rush and attack him, this is when he would then be blown away by a ginormous wind cannon that shot out of All For One's hand. As even though All For One is still in recovery, he's still strong enough to take on Stain. As Stain will end up getting out from the blow, he continues trying to fight All For One, but All For One had enough of this, as this is when he ends up actually compressing the arm cannon, causing Stain to take ginormous amount of damage. As Stain winces in pain and tries to get up, unfortunately it will be too late as All For One was already in front of him. As Stain begins to ask him who he was, All For One doesn't say anything and just begins to chuckle maniacally. As this is when suddenly he would then activate his quirk to steal Stain's quirk right before him, as Stain was unable to do anything to stop him. As after that, this is when suddenly once again All For One would then compress his arm cannons as he ends up destroying a building, allowing it to collapse right on top of Stain. As All For One would look at the damage that he'd done, he begins to laugh maniacally, as he begins to chuckle about everything that had just occurred, as finally his plans were fully in motion. As now it was on to step 2, as this is where we then do a bit of a time skip. Now Deku by this point has returned back home, and he's spending time with both Eri and Inko, and at night he will return back to his vigilante work. But you see, as Deku continues on with the vigilante work, he begins to wonder what happened to Stain, as he's been trying to contact Stain for quite a while now, but unfortunately Stain has not once appeared. Now this caused Deku to be very upset as he tries to look for him and tries to find where he is, but unfortunately he is nowhere to be found. Until finally Deku was able to stumble upon him. As in the dead of midnight, as Deku was currently jumping from rooftop to rooftop, he ends up stumbling upon an investigation zone. As currently there will be tape all around surrounding the zone, as well as many signs to say that do not enter, Deku was still entering nonetheless. As when he enters the area, he begins to look around, wondering what happened here, until he then stops. As this is when he ends up seeing it, the familiar blade of Stains, as well as multiple daggers and a lot of blood. Now Deku seeing this at first thought that maybe Stain was here and he was fighting someone, and it led to this, but he still thought that Stain had escaped, or at least that's what he wished for. If it wasn't for the fact that the very headgear that Stain used to wear to cover his face was right there as well. Deku would walk towards it as he couldn't believe his eyes. It would be bloody and damaged, as this is when Deku ends up looking at the rubble, and instantly he begins to activate the powers of the Rinnegan to instantly teleport them out of the way, and when he does, he sees him. As currently right there, standing right in front of him, will be none other than Stain. As Deku couldn't do nothing more but look at him in shock. He couldn't believe it. As after all, Stain was strong, alright? He was definitely strong, one of the strongest people that Deku even knew. So the fact that he was taken care of, and like this, was just completely disrespectful. Deku couldn't believe it. As he stares at the destruction zone with shock, he will then begin to leave the area wondering who did it, as he wants to get revenge. As this is where we now do a time skip. For the next following days that went by, Deku would continue hunting down villains, and villains would continue going after Deku, trying to hunt him down. Deku would face every last one of them and beat them down brutally, as he didn't care anymore, as right now he was trying to find the person who ended Stain's life. Now all the while this was happening, the same thing that happened in the main timeline, where Momo was actually able to give them all the code to where, all the Nomu were, that still ends up happening, as they ended up discovering where the League of Villains were, as where all the Nomu were. And just like in the main timeline, the squad is formed as they decide to hunt down Shigaraki, and also begin to hunt down the Nomu. And all this will end up happening just like it does in canon, all the way to the point where Mount Lady would end up crushing all the Nomu that were in the building. But you see, this is where the difference would then happen, as instead of All For One appearing there, it will be something else completely different. As we see Deku currently right now once again finishing up his vigilante work, as he finally taken care of a couple of villains that were currently going after him. Now as Deku was heading back home, he'll begin to wonder once again who was Stain's killer, as he promises once again to kill him off when he sees him. Now we now turn to when Deku ends up arriving home as he opens his door and hoping to see his mother as well as Iida there. But when Deku ends up entering the room, it's completely dark. Now at first Deku just thought that Iida and Inko had gone to bed as he decides to walk up the stairs and go to his room. But just as Deku was about to enter his room, he then sees his mother's door wide open and the TV on. Now this confuses Deku as he then walks towards the area, as this is when he enters into the room and he sees something that almost made him see red. As currently sitting on the bed watching TV with both Iida and Inko will be none other than All For One. Inko and Iida will be both shaking in terror as Inko will be begging him not to do anything while he just ends up chuckling and telling them to look at the TV. Now All For One ends up turning his attention back to Deku, all the while smiling, telling him that he welcomes him home. And Deku, after seeing this, grows livid, as Deku would activate the Limbo clone, causing it to appear right in front of All For One, although he couldn't see it, as this is when the Limbo clone would then punch All For One in the chest, sending him away from both Deku's mother as well as Iida. Now eventually, after getting hit by the clone, All For One is able to get up and act as if nothing happened, as he tells Deku that wasn't very nice, but Deku didn't care anymore. He was gonna kill him now, as he instantly begins to fight off against All For One. Now Deku instantly tells both Inko and Iida to run away while he fights off against All For One, and once they end up exiting out the room, Deku does not hesitate to destroy the very room that they were in, activating the Shinra Tensei to almost nearly maximum power, destroying the entire room and causing All For One to be sent flying into the sky. Now as All For One gets sent as All For One ends up getting sent to the sky, he ends up completely just levitating up in the air, telling Deku that wasn't nice, and this ends up causing Deku to be very pissed off once again, as he jumps from the ground, causing it to crater in a little bit, as he then rushes at All For One with a punch. Now All For One ends up dodging the punch, as this is when Deku would then suddenly slip out a dagger from his wrist, as he tries to stab directly into All For One's head, but unfortunately All For One dodges out the way, as he ends up blasting Deku away with an arm cannon. Now as All For One chuckles about what he just done, this is when suddenly he then stops, as Deku ends up switching places with the Limbo clone, causing him to appear once again in front of All For One and suddenly kick him in the face. Now All For One gets sent flying because of this hit, but is able to recover as he begins to chuckle at Deku's actions, all the while Deku ends up landing down onto the street of his own local area. Now All For One begins to compliment Deku on his strength, as this is when he then looks at Deku's neighborhood and begins to say that it was very nice. As this is when suddenly he begins to charge up arm cannons, and Deku, seeing this, prepared for it to be aimed at him, only for him to be looking on in horror, as this is when All For One would then redirect the air cannons to his entire neighborhood. Seeing this, Deku then jumps over trying to stop him, but unfortunately it was too late, as All For One will blow away a large portion of his neighborhood. Deku ends up looking at the destruction in shock, as he couldn't believe it, as this is where we then see All For One begin to laugh, as he laughs at Deku's pitiful expression. And this is when finally Deku was able to make sense of everything. This man only did all this, just to get a reaction out of Deku, and Deku couldn't believe it. This man was so petty, so ignorant, he couldn't believe it, as All For One begins to laugh at Deku's horrified expression, all the while he begins to explain to Deku how exactly he found him, and how exactly he even knew of him. As ever since the Shiosaki incident, ever since the USJ incident, All For One has been keeping tabs of Deku. And although Deku at first thought this entire time that they were only going after him was because of the fact that they knew of Shiosaki, what actually happened was because of the fact that All For One, he had been behind it all from the very beginning. He had been sending countless villains directly towards Deku to find out more and more information about him, and he had made sure to keep a vigil on him the entire time. And Deku, after hearing this, couldn't believe it. This man All For One did all this destruction, all this pain, all this stress that Deku has literally been caused by this one man, and all because of the fact that he simply just wanted to see a reaction out of him. It didn't make any sense. As he begins to call out All For One on his bullcrap, this is when All For One then reveals that he actually wants Deku's abilities. He begins to state that Deku's powers and abilities aren't that of quirks. They are something way more special, something that he rightfully deserves. And after hearing this, Deku feels more and more disgust for this man, as this is when All For One then states that he's gonna actually take Deku's abilities away from him. And Deku, after hearing that, once again did not care anymore, as by this point it was very clear what's gonna happen. He was gonna kill All For One, and no one was gonna stop him. As All For One, seeing Deku's terrifying expression, we begin to laugh once again, as he begins to compliment Deku on his glare. All the while, Deku looks at All For One and just silently vows that he's gonna kill him off. As this is where we then see Deku then disappear as he appears right in front of All For One with the katana directly at his neck as he tries to swipe away so that way All For One's head can be sent flying. This is when, to his surprise, All For One ends up dodging out the way as he ends up sending Deku flying with an armed cannon. Now All For One begins to laugh once again as he tells Deku that he's gone sloppy, only for Deku to once again rise up. Deku ends up cursing himself for what was going on, especially since you gotta realize one thing, Deku was extremely tired by this point. Deku had spent a long night of being a vigilante, and due to this, he was actually running pretty low on energy. Not only that, but as soon as he ends up returning home, he has to deal with this guy. So as you could already guess, Deku was feeling very exhausted. But still nonetheless, his blind rage was preventing him from passing out or truly begin to show off that he was really tired. As after that, we will then see Deku continuously fighting off against All For One, all the while All For One will be enjoying every last second of it. As thanks to him wearing down Deku for too long, Deku was feeling way more tired and was moving way slower. And this allowed All For One to get a few hits in, even to the point where he even cuts Deku. And Deku, after getting cut, didn't really think much of it. After all, it was not important. I mean, it was just a little bit of blood. What can that do? But All For One, after seeing the blood, he begins to smile maniacally, as he felt true excitement after seeing what he saw. As this is when he decides to once again attack Deku mentally, as he begins to actually lick Deku's blood, and this caused Deku to feel paralysis. And Deku, after getting paralyzed, will look at All For One horrified. As All For One begins to laugh, he begins to explain to Deku that yes, he was the one behind the death of Stain. It was me, Izuku. It was me from the very beginning. Those would be the exact words that All For One would say to Deku, as Deku can do nothing more but look at this man, no, this monster that was standing right in front of him. As All For One begins to laugh even more, and seeing the fact that Deku was still, well, paralyzed, he begins to shoot off more and more arm cannons directly at him. And Deku, seeing them approaching, can do nothing, as thanks to the paralysis, he's not able to do anything at all. Now this ends up causing Deku to be sent flying and crashing through multiple amount of houses and buildings, as he ends up taking large amount of damage. Now this once again causes All For One to laugh as he decides to torment Deku a little bit more, as while Deku's down, he decides to once again destroy more and more of Deku's neighborhood. The local bakery that Deku works at, destroyed. A bunch of homes of people that Deku knew of, destroyed. And Deku will be there slowly trying to get up as he watches All For One laughing at his misery, his pain. And Deku, after seeing this, gets more and more upset, more and more angry, as he curses his body for being too weak at the very moment. As he ends up slamming his fist into the ground over and over again, this will actually end up activating another ability of the Rinnegan. As the Rinnegan would respond to Deku's desires, this is when suddenly Deku would then summon out the King of Hell. The King of Hell would appear right behind Deku, surprising him, as this is when it would then open its mouth and actually swallow Deku whole. Now All For One, as he was about to attack once again Deku's village, he then stops as he sees the ginormous King of Hell that was actually eating Deku. He will look at it confused before he ends up realizing that Deku was trying to, as he thinks that Deku was trying to end himself so that way he can't get his abilities. And All For One, seeing this, cannot let that happen. There was no way. As he rushes directly to the King of Hell, as he begins to attack it over and over again, with the damage doing nothing, and so suddenly it will then open its mouth as steam begins to come out. As All For One looks at it confused, this is when, to his surprise, Deku ends up walking out of there, completely fine. As Deku ends up walking out of there, he looks directly at All For One, and All For One, after seeing this, already knew that he fucked up. As this is when Deku then begins to fight off against All For One, and as he does, he truly begins to make full use of the Rinnegan's abilities. As he brings out animals to jump All For One, all the while he can't do anything. He used Bashon Tennin to bring All For One close to him, and Shinra Tensei to blow him down to the ground. Now All For One looks at Deku completely pissed off, as he begins to explain to Deku that what he's doing is no different than him, as Deku was literally causing more destruction in his own neighborhood. But you see, by this point, Deku decides to fully embrace it. Embracing about not caring at all at the very moment, as all he ever cared about at this very moment right now was finishing off All For One. As All For One and Deku continue on with their battle, or should I say one-sided slaughter, since All For One could not do anything, it will eventually end up reaching its climax as All For One would be brought down to his knees, not being able to do anything. He ends up cursing out at Deku for doing what he'd done to him, as he tries to get up and move, but unfortunately his body was way too weak at this point. As Deku during this battle had brought out 100% of his Rinnegan's abilities, causing Deku to be at his strongest. And if you want a reference, think of Gojo after he got beaten up by Toji and he got his awakening. That'll be Deku at this very moment, as Deku truly felt as if he was awakened. As currently right now, All For One will be currently on his knees trying to get up, but unfortunately is unable to, as surrounding him will be all different sorts of animals, each one of them holding the Rinnegan eye, and standing right behind Deku would also be the King of Hell. As Deku continues approaching All For One as he tells Deku to get away, but unfortunately Deku is not listening to him. As Deku looks directly at All For One will feel true fear as he begins to hear Deku begin to insult him, his existence, and overall do the very same thing that All For One was doing to him, as he begins to make fun of his pitiful expression as well as how hopeless he was at the very moment, as All For One is unable to do anything. As this is when Deku then decides to finally finish him off, but he's not going to finish him off the old casual way of just ripping out his soul, no. He's going to do it in a much more spectacular way. As this is when Deku would then suddenly end up bringing out the demonic statue, as it ends up bursting from the ground right in front of All For One, and it looms over him, blindfolded. All For One looks at the statue in shock, as this is when he would then hear Deku begin to comment about everything that's going to happen to him. As All For One, he's not going to go to the afterlife. As to Deku, that would be way too kind. That would be way too forgiving. No, instead, Deku will hold on to All For One's soul, to torment it for all of eternity. As this is when Deku would then get stabbed with one of the metal rods from the ghetto statue. As the ghetto statue would then open its mouth to reveal a purple dragon, as it ends up shooting it from its mouth. The purple dragon will swirl around to the air for a little bit before suddenly looking directly at All For One. As All For One looks at it, he begins to once again beg for his life, but unfortunately, Deku didn't care. As just as All For One gives Deku one last horrified expression, Deku ends up giving him the most smuggest and most cruelest smile that All For One has ever seen in his life, as he finally now knew what exactly a monster was for the first time ever, as he finally realized that he can never compare to one. As this is when the dragon would then suddenly end up slamming directly into All For One, taking his soul and allowing Deku to trap it and seal it away into the ghetto statue. As after devouring All For One's soul, the ghetto statue would end up leaving the area as Deku summons it. As Deku ends up looking at what he just done, he begins to laugh maniacally, enjoying every second about what he just done. As this is where we then do a little bit of a time skip. Now after the end of All For One, eventually the heroes would arrive at the scene as they see all the destruction that had occurred. Now eventually they begin to question all the locals that had survived the wreckage, as to the surprise of everyone, all of them had stayed alive. And the main reason for this one is because of the fact that now that Deku was awakened, he was able to use the King of Hell properly, as he was able to use it to heal up everyone in an instant. So this allowed everyone to survive with no injuries, and once again confuse and surprise the heroes. Another thing that actually ends up happening is that they discovered the body of All For One, and they're very surprised and actually worried at first, but they soon find out that he was completely dead. He was gone. All Might would eventually end up arriving at the scene, as he will be very surprised, as he couldn't believe that, well, All For One was dead, finally after so many years. He felt true relief, especially since now that he finally got his apprentice, and now that All For One was gone, it seems as if finally the future was looking bright. And for those that are wondering what happened to Shigaraki as well as the rest of the League of Villains, they all eventually end up getting captured, as thanks to All For One not being there to bail them out, unfortunately they're not able to get away. So yes, the League of Villains were all captured. So now this finally ends up leaving only Deku, as you now wonder what exactly happened to him. And you see, the thing is, Deku finally at this point has realized that he is now truly the strongest, as by this point Deku has truly gone through his Gojo awakening and he truly knows how to use the power of the Rinnegan. But he also knows that he won't be around forever, and he also knows that corrupt heroes will still end up arriving here and there. So with that thought in mind, Deku decides to make a permanent change to the justice system, as he decides to actually work hard and actually becomes a chairman to the whole hero association, as this not only allowed Deku to gain a large amount of money, but this also allowed him to truly make a change in the justice system, as many heroes were fired after Deku was put in position. Now while many people have their own complaints about the chairman aka Deku, the one thing they can already tell is the fact that Deku was already making pretty good changes, as crime rates had gone down drastically, a lot of corrupt heroes were taking out the job, and not only that, but for some weird reason a lot of people actually could feel safer now. As the main reason for this one is because of the fact that whenever the heroes were to fall, or whenever there will be a challenge that they cannot overcome, Deku will be there to clean up their mistakes. He will be the one to stand above every last one of them, as he alone would remain as the strongest. as this is where I'm now going to put an end to what if Deku had the Rinnegan. Hopefully you guys do enjoy. I'm not going to lie to you guys, I very much had a hard time making this what if, mostly because of the fact that I kept on stuttering over my words, and I know that some of you guys have gotten used to it, but I still try working on that. And another thing is because of the fact that legit, I almost ended the story way too early, and it's mostly because of the fact that the Rinnegan is way too busted. And the thing is, that actually comes with a lot of my Deku what ifs. Because the one big problem I have when it comes to making Deku what ifs is because of the fact that depending on the ability that I give Deku, he literally can end the story in an instant. And that's the same thing when it comes to the Rinnegan. And it's kind of hard to write around that. Now I always try to find like a limiter to place on like the Rinnegan and everything like that, so that way the Deku does not end the story way too quickly, but even then I'm having a hard time. So yeah guys, it was rough making this what if, but still I hope you guys do enjoy. Don't worry, I will get better at making my Deku what ifs, that is a promise, I promise I will get better. But until then, it's your host Sage Samurai here, and he's signing off. So peace, and have a lovely day.